My name is Scarlett Hayes. I'm 26. And last Thanksgiving changed everything I thought I knew about family loyalty. What started as our typical holiday gathering, mom's famous stuffing, dad's terrible jokes, my brother Kevin's endless bragging about his promotion, turned into the moment I discovered my parents had been systematically stealing from my late grandmother's estate for 3 years. The betrayal wasn't just financial. They'd convinced the entire family I was the greedy one, questioning the will, when they were the ones who'd already liquidated Grandma Rose's jewelry collection, her vintage car, and even her wedding ring. By the time dessert was served, I was banned from all future family events, labeled as ungrateful and money-hungry, while they walked away with over $200,000 of my inheritance. Hey everyone! Before we dive into this incredible story of family betrayal and ultimate justice, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. If you've ever dealt with family drama or felt like the black sheep, you'll definitely want to stick around for this one. Hit that like button if you're ready for some serious family revenge karma. And don't forget to subscribe because this story has twists that'll leave you questioning everything you think you know about blood being thicker than water. The week after Thanksgiving felt like living in an alternate reality. I kept replaying that dinner conversation where my parents had cornered me about constantly asking inappropriate questions about Grandma Rose's estate. According to them, I was being disrespectful to her memory by questioning where her belongings had gone. My mother, Patricia, had actually teared up, saying how disappointed Grandma would be in my greed and suspicion. My father, Robert, had backed her up completely, his voice stern and paternal as he explained that most of Grandma's valuables had been donated to charity as she would have wanted. But something felt wrong, deeply, fundamentally wrong. Grandma Rose had always been meticulous about her possessions. She'd shown me her jewelry collection countless times, explaining the history behind each piece. Her 1967 Mustang convertible had been her pride and joy. The idea that she'd want these meaningful items donated to strangers instead of passed down to family members didn't align with the woman who'd spent hours teaching me about our family history through her treasured belongings. I started with public records. Turns out, when you're determined enough, you can find a surprising amount of information online. Property transfers, vehicle registrations, business licenses. It's all there if you know where to look. What I discovered made my blood run cold. The Mustang hadn't been donated. It had been sold to a classic car dealership in Phoenix for $18,000. The sale was registered under my father's name, dated just 2 months after Grandma's funeral. I found the dealership's website and called them directly. The salesman remembered the car perfectly. "A beautiful restoration," he said, "sold by a man who claimed he was downsizing his collection." That was just the beginning. I spent the next 2 weeks diving deeper, and each discovery felt like another punch to the gut. Grandma's jewelry hadn't been donated either. I found records of multiple sales to high-end consignment shops across the city. Her vintage Chanel pieces, her diamond engagement ring, her grandmother's pearl necklace, all sold within 6 months of her death. The total value was staggering, but the real kicker came when I found the safety deposit box records. Grandma had maintained 3 boxes at different banks, something she'd never mentioned to anyone. According to the access logs, my parents had cleaned them out systematically over the course of a year. Securities, cash, rare coins, historical documents, everything gone. I sat in my apartment, surrounded by printouts and bank statements, feeling like I was in a crime documentary. The total amount they'd stolen was approaching $300,000, money and items that, according to Grandma's will, should have been split between all her grandchildren. Money that would have changed my life, helped me finally buy a house instead of renting this cramped apartment, maybe even start the nonprofit I'd been dreaming about. The betrayal cut deeper than the money, though. They'd looked me in the eye and called me greedy while they were systematically looting my inheritance. They'd turned the entire family against me, painting me as the villain in a story where I was actually the victim. I called my cousin Sarah that night. She was Grandma Rose's other favorite grandchild, and we'd always been close. When I started explaining what I'd found, she was quiet for a long time. "Scarlett," she finally said, "I've been wondering about some things too. Remember Grandma's china cabinet? The one with all the antique dishes Shed collected from estate sales? Mom mentioned it had been donated. But I drove by the house last month and saw it being loaded into Uncle Robert's truck. That's when I realized this wasn't just about me. They were stealing from all of us. Sarah, my other cousins, anyone who should have inherited something meaningful from the woman who'd raised half our family after various divorces and remarriages. Grandma Rose had been the matriarch, the glue that held us together, and my parents were pillaging her legacy while using her memory to manipulate us into silence. Sarah agreed to help me investigate further. We started reaching out to other family members, carefully, asking innocent questions about whether they'd received any keepsakes from Grandma. The pattern became clear quickly. Nobody had received anything. Every single item had allegedly been donated or lost or not worth keeping. By the end of that second week, I had a decision to make. I could confront my parents privately, demand they return what they'd stolen, and hope they'd do the right thing. Or I could accept that people who would steal from their own family while manipulating everyone else weren't likely to suddenly develop a conscience. I chose a third option. I decided to document everything, build an airtight case, and then expose them in a way that would ensure they couldn't spin the narrative or play victim. They'd taught me that family loyalty was conditional on keeping their secrets and enabling their lies. It was time they learned what conditional loyalty looked like from the other side. The next month transformed me into someone I barely recognized. Gone was the people-pleasing daughter who always gave everyone the benefit of the doubt. In her place was a woman with a mission, armed with spreadsheets, bank records, and a growing network of allies who'd also been deceived. Sarah proved invaluable. As a paralegal, she knew how to navigate legal databases and public records in ways that would have taken me months to figure out. Together, we built what she called prosecutorial-level documentation. Every sale, every transaction, every lie. We had paper trails for everything. The safety deposit boxes were the smoking gun we needed. Banks keep meticulous records, and accessing a deceased person's safety deposit box requires specific legal procedures. My parents had used forged power of attorney documents, something Sarah spotted immediately when we requested the bank records through proper legal channels. "This isn't just inheritance theft," Sarah explained as we reviewed the documents in her kitchen one evening. "This is felony fraud. They falsified legal documents to access those boxes. The statute of limitations hasn't run out, and the evidence is rock solid." But I wasn't interested in criminal charges. Not yet. I wanted something more personal, more fitting for people who'd used family dynamics as their weapon of choice. I started with my brother Kevin. Had always been the golden child, but he was also fundamentally decent underneath all his bragging and competitiveness. I invited him for coffee and laid out everything I'd discovered, complete with documentation. His reaction was everything I'd hoped for and more. Kevin went pale, then angry, then absolutely furious. "They made me complicit," he kept saying. "All those times I defended them when you were asking questions. They made me complicit in this." Kevin revealed something I hadn't known. My parents had given him several of Grandma's less valuable items, claiming they were gifts Shed wanted him to have. Her antique desk, some books, a few pieces of jewelry they'd described as costume rather than real. Looking at my documentation, we realized even these gifts to Kevin were worth thousands of dollars, money that should have been split among all the grandchildren. "I feel sick," Kevin said. "I've been sitting at that desk every day, working on it, thinking Grandma wanted me to have it. And the whole time, they were stealing from everyone and using me as cover." My cousin Marcus was next. At 34, he was the oldest grandchild and had always been Grandma Rose's helper with financial matters. Shed trusted him to drive her to bank appointments and help her organize her papers. When I showed him the evidence, his reaction was swift and decisive. "I'm done protecting them," he said. "Completely done. Grandma trusted me to help her keep track of her affairs, and I feel like I failed her by not catching this sooner." Marcus had access to something crucial: Grandma's personal address book and correspondence. Going through her papers, which my parents hadn't bothered to take, we found letters Shed written but never sent, draft wills from different time periods, and most importantly, a detailed inventory shed made of her valuables for insurance purposes. The inventory was devastating. It listed every piece of jewelry with photographs, appraisal values, and sentimental notes about which family member she hoped would treasure each item. The Mustang was there too, along with detailed restoration receipts and a note that she wanted it to stay in the family for someone who would appreciate its history. Reading her handwritten notes about wanting her belongings to bring joy to my grandchildren and keep our family memories alive while knowing what my parents had done felt like attending her funeral all over again. But it also steeled my resolve. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about honoring a woman who'd poured her love into collecting and preserving things she hoped would connect her family across generations. My parents had taken that dream and turned it into their personal ATM. I spent hours on the phone with auction houses, consignment shops, and private collectors. Many of Grandma's items were gone forever, sold to strangers who had no idea of their emotional significance. But some were still available, being held in inventory or offered for resale. I started making strategic purchases, slowly buying back pieces of our family history with my own savings. The process was expensive and heartbreaking. Grandma's engagement ring, a 1,950 seconds Art Deco piece shed worn every day of her marriage, cost me $4,000 to buy back from an estate jewelry dealer. Her collection of first edition Nancy Drew books, which Shed read to me as a child, cost another $600 at an antiquarian bookshop. Each purchase felt like a small victory and a massive injustice simultaneously. I was having to buy back my own inheritance while my parents sat on the proceeds, probably congratulating themselves on how cleverly they'd managed the whole situation. Sarah suggested we hire a private investigator to fill in any gaps in our documentation, but it turned out to be unnecessary. Between public records, bank statements, and the network of cousins who were now actively helping, we had more evidence than we needed. The most damning piece came from an unexpected source, my Aunt Linda, my mother's sister. She called me out of the blue one evening, her voice shaky and uncertain. "Scarlett, I need to tell you something that's been eating at me," she said. "Your mother asked me to witness some documents about 6 months after your grandmother passed. She said they were insurance papers, but I remember them looking like bank authorizations. I signed them because I trusted her, but I've been having bad feelings about it ever since." Linda's testimony provided the final piece of our puzzle. Shed unknowingly helped my parents forge the documents they'd used to access Grandma's accounts. When I explained what had really happened, she was horrified and immediately offered to provide a sworn statement about what Shed witnessed. By the end of that month, we had enough evidence to bury them. But I still wasn't ready to strike. I wanted to choose my moment carefully, make sure the impact would be maximum and the message would be clear. They'd used family gatherings as their stage for manipulation and gaslighting. It seemed only fitting that a family gathering would be the stage for their downfall. Christmas was coming, and despite my banishment from Thanksgiving, I knew they'd expect things to blow over by the holidays. My parents always counted on family pressure and time to smooth over conflicts. They had no idea that this time was working against them, giving me more opportunities to build my case and recruit allies. The plan was coming together beautifully. I just needed to wait for the perfect moment to execute it. December brought an unexpected development that perfectly set up what I'd been planning. My mother called me on a Tuesday evening, her voice carrying that fake sweetness she used when she wanted something. "Scarlett, honey, I know we had some tension at Thanksgiving," she began, as if systematically stealing my inheritance and turning the family against me counted as mere tension. "But Christmas is about forgiveness and family. Your father and I have decided to let you come to Christmas dinner, provided you promise not to bring up any of that unpleasantness about your grandmother's things." The audacity was breathtaking. They were graciously allowing me to attend a family gathering where they'd probably be wearing jewelry they'd stolen from my dead grandmother, driving cars they'd bought with my inheritance money, and playing the role of grieving, generous parents who'd honored their mother's charitable wishes. "That's very thoughtful of you, Mom," I said, my voice carefully neutral. "I'll be there." What she didn't know was that I'd been hoping for exactly this opportunity. "Sarah, Kevin, Marcus, and I had been planning for weeks. Even Aunt Linda was on board, horrified by her unwitting participation in the document fraud and eager to make things right. I spent the next 2 weeks making final preparations. The most important task was creating what Id started thinking of as the presentation, a comprehensive display of evidence that would be impossible to dismiss, deny, or spin. Sarah helped me organize everything into a clear, chronological timeline with supporting documentation for every claim. But I also wanted to do something that would hit them on an emotional level, something that would make the family understand not just the financial betrayal, but the deeper violation of trust and memory. That's when I came up with the idea of the memorial display. I'd been buying back Grandma's belongings whenever possible, spending my savings to reclaim pieces of our family history. By Christmas week, I'd managed to recover about 30 items: jewelry, books, small antiques, even a few pieces of her china that I'd tracked down through online auctions. Each item had cost me money that should never have been spent, but seeing them together again felt like bringing pieces of Grandma Rose back to life. I arranged everything on a large poster board, with photographs showing each item, documentation of when and how my parents had sold it, and copies of Grandma's handwritten notes about who Shed hoped would inherit each piece. It was like a museum exhibit titled Stolen Memories: How Patricia and Robert Hayes Betrayed Their Family's Trust. Kevin had his own contribution to the plan. As the golden child, he still had access to my parents' house and their personal information. Had discovered they'd opened a joint investment account where they'd been depositing the proceeds from Grandma's belongings. The account balance was now over $400,000, money they'd been systematically investing while telling everyone they were struggling financially and couldn't afford to help with family expenses. They literally told me they couldn't help with Mom's medical bills last month, Marcus said when Kevin shared this information. Said they were stretched thin since Dad's retirement. And they're sitting on almost $500,000 of stolen money. That revelation added another layer to their betrayal. While they'd been building wealth with our stolen inheritance, they'd been pleading poverty to avoid helping with family obligations. My elderly aunt had been struggling with medical expenses that my parents could have easily covered with money that wasn't even rightfully theirs. Sarah's legal expertise proved invaluable for the final component of my plan. Shed researched the relevant laws and prepared a comprehensive legal document outlining every crime my parents had committed: theft, fraud, forgery, and breach of fiduciary duty. The document included potential penalties and made it clear that the statute of limitations hadn't expired for any of their actions. This isn't just a family dispute, Sarah explained. What they did is prosecutable under both state and federal law. The forged bank documents alone could result in significant prison time. But I still didn't want to involve law enforcement, not immediately. I wanted to give them one chance to do the right thing, to confess their crimes and make restitution voluntarily. More importantly, I wanted the entire family to see who they really were when their carefully constructed facade finally crumbled. Christmas morning arrived gray and cold, matching my mood perfectly. I loaded my car with evidence boxes, the memorial display, and a folder containing bank routing numbers for accounts where my parents could transfer the stolen money back to its rightful owners. I'd done the math. With interest and appreciation, they owed the family estate over $450,000. The drive to my parents' house felt surreal. I'd made this trip hundreds of times over the years, usually carrying presents and anticipation for a day of family warmth and tradition. This time, I was carrying evidence of the most profound betrayal I'd ever experienced, preparing to destroy the family dynamic forever. But I wasn't nervous. If anything, I felt calm and determined. They'd taught me that family was about loyalty and love, then shown me that their version of loyalty was conditional and their love came with strings attached. Today, they were going to learn that consequences could be conditional too. I parked behind Kevin's car and took a deep breath. Through the window, I could see the warm glow of Christmas lights and the silhouettes of family members already gathered in the living room. For just a moment, I felt a pang of sadness for what we could have been, a real family built on honesty and mutual respect instead of manipulation and theft. Then I thought about Grandma Rose, about her careful handwritten notes describing which grandchild she hoped would treasure each of her belongings. I thought about the strangers now wearing her jewelry and driving her car while her actual family had been told she wanted her possessions donated to charity. The sadness transformed into resolve. It was time for the truth, time for justice, and time for my parents to face the consequences of believing they were smarter than everyone else. I gathered my evidence boxes and headed for the door, ready to give them a Christmas they'd never forget. The next hour would either restore some measure of justice to our family or destroy it completely. Given what my parents had already done to us, destruction was starting to look like the healthier option. Walking into my parents' house that Christmas morning felt like entering a stage where I was about to deliver the performance of my lifetime. The familiar sense of cinnamon and pine couldn't mask the tension I carried in every step. My family was scattered around the living room. My parents playing the perfect hosts, my cousins exchanging gifts, everyone maintaining the facade of normalcy that had become our family's specialty. "Scarlett," my mother exclaimed with practiced enthusiasm, rushing to hug me as if our Thanksgiving confrontation had never happened. "I'm so glad you decided to join us for Christmas. Family is everything, isn't it?" The irony of her words hit me like a physical blow. Family is everything, which was exactly why her betrayal cut so deep and why what I was about to do was necessary. "Actually, Mom," I said, setting down my boxes near the Christmas tree, "I brought something special to share with everyone. Something about family. And Grandma Rose. And the true meaning of Christmas." Kevin caught my eye from across the room and gave me an almost imperceptible nod. Sarah was already positioned near the fireplace, her phone ready to record everything. Marcus had taken a seat where he could see everyone's reactions. Even Aunt Linda was here, looking nervous but determined to finally tell the truth about those documents Shed signed. "How wonderful," my father boomed from his armchair, probably assuming I was about to apologize and grovel for forgiveness. "We love hearing about your grandmother. She'd be so happy to see us all together like this." That opening was perfect. I pulled out the memorial display I'd created, setting it up on the coffee table where everyone could see it. The room fell silent, as family members began to recognize Grandma's belongings in the photographs. "You're absolutely right, Dad. Grandma would want us all together. She'd also want us to remember her legacy and make sure her wishes were honored." I gestured to the display. "This is everything I've been able to buy back from the people you sold it to." My mother's face went pale. "Scarlett, what are you talking about? We donated those things to charity, just like Mother wanted." "No, Mom, you didn't." I pulled out the first folder of documentation. "You sold them. All of them." Grandma's engagement ring went to Morrison Estate Jewelry for $4,000. Her pearl necklace sold to Vintage Treasures Consignment for $1,200. The Mustang went to Classic Auto Phoenix for $18,000. I had receipts for everything, bank deposit records showing the money going into their accounts, even photos from the business's websites showing Grandma's items for sale. The room was dead silent, except for the sound of papers rustling as I laid out the evidence. "These are lies," my father said, but his voice lacked conviction. "You're making this up because you're angry about being excluded from Thanksgiving." "Am I making up the safety deposit box records too?" I pulled out the bank statements, the forged power of attorney documents, the access logs showing my parents had systematically emptied 3 different boxes over the course of a year, or the fact that you used Aunt Linda to help you forge documents. All eyes turned to Linda, who stood up with tears in her eyes. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice shaking. "Patricia asked me to witness some papers. She said they were insurance documents, but they were bank authorizations. I had no idea what I was really signing." The room erupted. Cousins started asking questions, voices overlapping in confusion and growing anger. My parents tried to maintain their innocence, but their explanations became increasingly desperate and contradictory. "The money went to charity," my mother insisted. "Then why is it sitting in your Charles Schwab investment account?" Kevin asked, standing up with his own folder of evidence. $437,000, Mom. I've seen the statements." That revelation hit the room like a bomb. Family members who'd been struggling financially, who'd asked my parents for help with medical bills and college tuition only to be told they couldn't afford it, realized they'd been lied to while my parents hoarded stolen money. "You told me you couldn't help with Emma's student loans," my cousin Sarah said, her voice barely controlled. "You said you were living on a fixed income. You have almost $500,000 of stolen money, and you let your own granddaughter struggle with debt." My mother tried a different tactic, turning on the tears and playing victim. "How can you children be so cruel to us? We're grieving too." Mother's death was devastating. "And now you're attacking us with these horrible accusations." But I was ready for that manipulation. I pulled out Grandma's handwritten inventory, her personal notes about each item and who she hoped would inherit it. I began reading aloud. "My engagement ring should go to Scarlett when she's ready for marriage. It represents hope and commitment, values I want her to carry forward." I looked directly at my mother. "You sold it to strangers for $4,000. My pearl necklace belonged to my grandmother. I hope Sarah will wear it on her wedding day and think of all the women in our family who came before her." My voice grew stronger with each revelation. "You sold our family history piece by piece and then lied about it." The emotional impact was devastating. Several family members were crying. Not just from sadness, but from rage. These weren't just valuable objects, they were connections to a woman we'd all loved, carefully preserved pieces of our family story that my parents had treated as nothing more than assets to liquidate. "The Mustang should go to Marcus," I continued reading. "He's the only one who truly appreciated classic cars and would take proper care of it. I restored it with love, and I want it to stay in the family for generations." Marcus had been quiet through most of the confrontation, but that broke him. "She let me help her work on that car," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Every weekend for 3 years. We'd be out in her garage, and she'd tell me stories about all the places she'd driven it. She made me promise it'd teach my kids to appreciate it someday." The room was in chaos now. Family members were demanding answers, asking what else my parents had hidden, questioning every story they'd been told about Grandma's final wishes. My parents found themselves completely outnumbered, their carefully constructed narrative crumbling under the weight of documented evidence. But I wasn't done yet. I pulled out the final piece of my presentation, Sarah's legal analysis outlining the crimes they'd committed and the potential consequences. "Fraud, theft, forgery, and breach of fiduciary duty," I announced. "Federal crimes with potential prison sentences. The statute of limitations hasn't expired on any of it." The threat of legal consequences seemed to finally break through my father's denial. "Now wait just a minute," he said, his voice taking on the patronizing tone he used when he felt cornered. "This is a family matter. There's no need to involve lawyers or courts." "You're right," I agreed. "It is a family matter. Which is why I'm going to give you one chance to handle this within the family before I take it to the authorities." I pulled out a folder containing bank routing numbers and account information for every grandchild who should have inherited something from Grandma Rose. "You have stolen $437,000 from this family. You're going to return every penny, with interest, distributed according to Grandma's actual wishes as outlined in her inventory notes. And if we refuse," my mother asked, her tears now replaced with cold calculation. "Then I file criminal charges tomorrow morning," I said simply. "Sarah has already prepared all the necessary paperwork. We have witnesses, documentation, and evidence that would make this the easiest prosecution in the county's history." The room fell silent, as my parents realized they were completely trapped. They could return the money and face family shame and ostracism, or they could refuse and face criminal prosecution with the same evidence that would inevitably come out in court anyway. "How did you even find all this information?" my father asked weakly. "The same way you found Grandma's safety deposit boxes," I replied. "Public records, bank statements, and asking the right questions. The difference is, I was looking for the truth while you were looking for opportunities to steal." Kevin stepped forward with a final piece of documentation. "I've also prepared paperwork to remove both of you as trustees of any remaining family assets," he said. "Effective immediately." You have no authority to make decisions about anyone's inheritance or estate planning. The power dynamic in the room had shifted completely. My parents, who'd spent months positioning themselves as the wise, generous administrators of Grandma's wishes, were now revealed as common thieves who'd manipulated their own family for financial gain. They tried a few more desperate strategies. Appeals to family loyalty. Claims that they'd borrowed the money with intention to return it. Accusations that I was being vindictive and destroying the family. But every argument fell flat against the mountain of evidence we'd assembled. Finally, faced with the choice between returning the money voluntarily or facing criminal prosecution, they capitulated. My father, his voice barely above a whisper, agreed to begin transferring the stolen funds back to their rightful owners within 48 hours. It was the most satisfying moment of my life. And also the saddest. It'd gotten justice for Grandma Rose and vindication for months of being painted as the villain. But I'd also watched my parents reveal themselves as people capable of stealing from their own children while manipulating everyone else into enabling their crimes. Christmas dinner was awkward, to say the least. But for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe freely around my family. The week following Christmas felt like living in the aftermath of a natural disaster. Everything looked the same on the surface, but the fundamental landscape of our family had been permanently altered. The transfers began immediately. My father, true to his word, started moving money back to the accounts of the grandchildren who should have inherited from Grandma Rose. But money, it turned out, was the easy part to fix. The trust, the relationships, the basic assumption that family members wouldn't steal from each other. Those were shattered beyond repair. My phone rang constantly that week. Cousins calling to thank me, to apologize for not believing me sooner, to share their own stories of times when my parents' explanations hadn't quite added up. Marcus called in tears after receiving his portion of the inheritance, saying he was finally going to be able to buy a house for his growing family. Sarah used her share to pay off her student loans and start a college fund for her daughter. But the calls from my parents were different entirely. My mother alternated between sobbing apologies and angry accusations that I'd destroyed the family for money. My father took a more calculating approach, trying to negotiate the terms of my silence and suggesting we could all move forward together if I agreed not to discuss what had happened with extended family or family friends. They still didn't understand. This had never been primarily about money. It had been about truth, justice, and honoring the memory of a woman who'd loved us all unconditionally. The money was just the measurable part of what they'd stolen. 3 days after Christmas, my cousin David called with disturbing news. He'd been going through some of Grandma Rose's papers that my parents had left behind, documents they'd apparently deemed worthless. Hidden in a box of old Christmas cards, He'd found a letter Grandma had written but never sent, dated just 2 months before her death. "You need to hear this," David said, then read aloud. "My dear family, I've been thinking about my will and my belongings, and I want to make sure my wishes are clear. I've seen too many families torn apart by inheritance disputes, and I don't want that for us. Every item in my house, every piece of jewelry, every book and dish and photograph, these things matter not because they're valuable, but because they connect us to each other, and to our shared history. I want each of my grandchildren to have something meaningful, something that will remind them they're part of a family legacy built on love and resilience." The letter went on for 3 pages, detailing specific items she wanted specific people to have, and explaining her reasoning for each decision. It was like receiving a message from beyond the grave, confirmation that everything ID fought for aligned with her actual wishes. But the letter also revealed something else. Grandma had suspected my parents might not honor her wishes. She'd written about her concerns that some family members viewed her belongings as assets to be liquidated rather than memories to be treasured. She'd even mentioned considering legal safeguards to prevent her estate from being mishandled. "She knew," I said to David, feeling a mix of vindication and heartbreak. "She knew they might do this, and she died worrying about it." That letter became the final piece of evidence that our intervention had been necessary. Grandma Rose hadn't just wanted her belongings to stay in the family. She'd specifically worried about the exact scenario that had unfolded. The community reaction was swift and brutal. Word spread quickly through our extended family network, then to family friends, neighbors, and eventually to my parents' social circles. They'd built their reputations on being upstanding community members, devoted parents, and caring children who'd nobly handled their elderly mother's affairs. The revelation that they were actually sophisticated thieves who'd manipulated their own family destroyed that carefully constructed image overnight. My mother stopped going to her book club. My father resigned from the church board. They became social pariahs in a community where reputation and trust were everything. The financial restitution was completed within 2 weeks, but the social consequences would follow them for years. Kevin called me a month later with an update that shouldn't have surprised me but somehow did. "They're selling the house," he said. "Moving to Arizona, starting over somewhere nobody knows them." It made sense, in a way. They'd stolen money to build a comfortable retirement, and when that plan fell apart, they had to face the consequences in a community that now knew who they really were. Running away was probably easier than trying to rebuild relationships they'd destroyed through their own choices, but their departure created an unexpected opportunity for healing within the broader family. Without my parents' constant manipulation and narrative control, family members started having honest conversations about things that had bothered them for years. Stories emerged about times when my parents' explanations hadn't made sense. Instances where they'd seemed more interested in financial gain than family welfare. Patterns of behavior that had been overlooked or excused because challenging them seemed too difficult. Sarah summarized it perfectly during a family dinner 6 weeks after Christmas. "They trained us all to doubt our own instincts and question our own perceptions. It's going to take time to trust ourselves again." The healing process was complicated and ongoing. Some family members struggled with guilt for not seeing what was happening sooner. Others dealt with anger at being manipulated and used. Everyone had to grapple with the reality that people we'd trusted completely had been lying to us for years. But there was also relief. The tension that had characterized family gatherings for months, the feeling that something was wrong but we couldn't name it, was finally gone. We could honor Grandma Rose's memory honestly, instead of pretending to celebrate charitable donations that had never happened. I used part of my recovered inheritance to create something I called the Rose Hayes Family Memorial Fund, a small scholarship program for family members pursuing education or starting businesses. It felt like a way to turn the stolen money into something that would have made Grandma proud, something that would benefit the family for generations instead of just enriching two people who'd already proven they couldn't be trusted with wealth. The fund's first recipient was my cousin Emma, Sarah's daughter, who used the scholarship to finish her nursing degree without taking on additional debt. At her graduation party, she gave a speech thanking Grandma Rose for finding a way to help me even after she was gone. That's when I finally felt like justice had been truly served. Not just the recovery of stolen money or the exposure of fraud, but the restoration of Grandma's actual legacy. A family that took care of each other and honored the values she'd tried to instill in all of us. 6 months later, I stood in the kitchen of my new house, purchased with my rightfully recovered inheritance, preparing for the first family gathering I'd ever hosted. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was using money my parents had stolen to create the kind of family environment they'd never been capable of fostering. One built on honesty, transparency, and genuine care for each other's well-being. The house itself felt like a symbol of everything that had changed. Instead of the cramped apartment where I'd spent countless hours documenting my parents' crimes, I now had space for the family heirlooms I'd bought back, room for holiday gatherings, and a sense of permanence that came from knowing I'd fought for what was rightfully mine. Kevin arrived first, carrying his daughter Emma on his shoulders and a covered dish that smelled like Grandma Rose's famous cornbread recipe. "I found her handwritten recipe cards," he explained, setting the dish on my counter. "Hidden in that antique desk Mom and Dad gave me. There are dozens of them, all in Grandma's handwriting, with little notes about family preferences and cooking tips. The recipe cards were like discovering treasure. Each one contained not just ingredients and instructions, but personal notes. Marcus loves extra butter. Sarah can't eat nuts. Scarlett always asks for seconds. They were evidence of the kind of grandmother she'd been, someone who paid attention to details and cared about making people happy. Sarah arrived next with her own discovery. A box of family photographs Grandma had organized but never distributed. Pictures spanning decades, carefully labeled with names, dates, and locations. Many of them showed Grandma wearing the jewelry my parents had sold, standing beside the Mustang they'd liquidated, surrounded by the belongings they'd treated as merchandise. "Look at this one," Sarah said, showing me a picture of teenage me sitting in Grandma's Mustang, her engagement ring visible as she pointed to something under the hood. "She was teaching you about the engine. You were maybe 16. I remembered that day perfectly. Grandma had insisted that every woman in the family should understand basic car maintenance, not to be dependent on others but to feel confident and capable. The lessons had been about much more than engines. They were about self-reliance, problem-solving, and refusing to be intimidated by things other people claimed were too complicated for you to understand. Those lessons had served me well during the investigation. When everyone told me I was wrong about my suspicions, when my parents insisted I was being paranoid and ungrateful, I'd remembered Grandma's voice telling me to trust my instincts and not let anyone convince me I wasn't smart enough to figure things out for myself. Marcus brought the biggest surprise of all. Head tracked down and purchased back Grandma's Mustang. The classic car dealership had sold it to a collector in California, but Marcus had spent months negotiating to buy it back. Had driven it cross-country to bring it home, and it was now parked in my driveway, looking exactly as beautiful as I remembered. "She wanted it to stay in the family," Marcus said simply. "It seemed wrong to let strangers have something that meant so much to her. Besides, I need to start teaching my kids about classic cars, just like she taught me." The symbolism was perfect. The Mustang represented everything my parents had tried to take from us: our connection to Grandma, our family history, our sense of belonging to something larger than ourselves. Having it back felt like reclaiming a piece of our collective soul. As more family members arrived, each bringing recovered heirlooms, shared memories, or simply their presence, I realized we'd accidentally created something my parents had never managed to achieve: a family gathering where everyone felt genuinely welcome and valued. The conversation naturally turned to my parents, who'd been living in Arizona for 3 months now. According to Kevin, they'd made no effort to maintain relationships with anyone in the family. No phone calls, no letters, no acknowledgement of birthdays or anniversaries. They'd simply vanished from our lives as completely as if they'd never existed. "Do you miss them?" my cousin David asked me during dinner. It was a fair question, and one I'd been grappling with for months. "I miss the parents I thought I had," I said finally. "I miss believing I came from people who valued family and integrity. But I don't miss the stress of constantly questioning my own perceptions or walking on eggshells to avoid triggering their manipulation tactics." Linda, who'd been quietly dealing with her own guilt about unknowingly helping them forge documents, spoke up. "I keep thinking about all the times Patricia would call me crying about money troubles, asking for small loans or help with expenses. Meanwhile, she was sitting on hundreds of thousands of dollars. I feel like such a fool." "You're not a fool," Sarah said firmly. "You trusted a family member who deliberately deceived you. That's not foolishness. That's normal human behavior. The problem wasn't your trust. It was their willingness to abuse it." That became the theme of the evening, recognizing that we'd all been victims of sophisticated manipulation, that our decision to trust family members wasn't weakness, and that choosing to maintain our capacity for trust, despite being betrayed, was actually a form of strength. As we sat around my dining room table, the same table where I'd spread out evidence of my parents' crimes months earlier, I felt a profound sense of completion. We'd not only recovered stolen money and belongings, we'd recovered our family's integrity and our ability to enjoy each other's company without underlying tension and deception. Emma, now 8 years old, asked if she could see Grandma Rose's jewelry. I brought out the pieces I'd managed to buy back, and she listened with wide eyes as I explained the history of each item. When I showed her the engagement ring, she asked if she could try it on. "It's too big for you now," I said, slipping it onto her tiny finger where it spun loosely. "But someday, when you're ready, it might be perfect." That moment crystallized everything Wed fought for. Not just the recovery of stolen property, but the restoration of family traditions and connections that transcend individual ownership. The ring would outlive all of us, but its meaning, love, commitment, family continuity, would only survive if we actively chose to preserve and pass it down. As the evening wound down and family members prepared to leave, Marcus asked if I'd learned any life lessons from the whole experience. I learned that family isn't just about blood relations, I said. It's about people who show up for each other, who tell the truth even when it's difficult, and who choose to stay connected through both good times and bad. My parents were family by blood, but you're all family by choice. And that's turned out to be much more valuable. The question sparked a broader conversation about trust, boundaries, and the difference between loyalty and enabling. We talked about how Grandma Rose had tried to teach us that love without honesty isn't really love, and how Shed modeled the kind of integrity we all wanted to carry forward. Before everyone left, we made plans for regular family gatherings. Not just holidays, but casual dinners, birthday celebrations, and opportunities to stay connected without the drama and manipulation that had characterized our family dynamics for years. 6 months ago, it'd been banned from family events and labeled as greedy and disruptive. Tonight, I was surrounded by people who valued truth over comfort, justice over false peace, and authentic relationships over performative family harmony. If you've made it this far in my story, I'd love to hear about your own experiences with family karma and justice. Have you ever had to stand up to family members who were taking advantage of others? How did you find the courage to speak truth when everyone around you wanted to maintain comfortable lies? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one, and your stories help me remember that standing up for what's right is always worth it, even when it's painful. Don't forget to hit that like button if this story resonated with you, and subscribe for more real-life family drama that proves truth really is stranger than fiction. Share this with anyone who's ever felt like the black sheep for asking uncomfortable questions or challenging family dynamics that didn't feel right. Thank you for taking this journey with me. And remember, sometimes the most loving thing you can do for your family is refuse to enable their worst behavior. Grandma Rose taught me that integrity matters more than keeping peace, and I hope her lesson helps you navigate whatever family challenges you're facing. Heiress to chosen family, recovered truth, and the kind of justice that comes not from revenge, but from refusing to let lies define your story. Until next time, keep standing up for what's right, even when it feels impossible.